And the storylines tend to be, why is Gen Z cutting off their parents, and often over ideology?
One of the greatest crises that's going on right now in the Christian world is how Christians have joined a lot of the secular world in this pattern or this trend of cutting off our parents. And this is such a clean dividing line between a secular way of living or thinking about family and a fully biblically Christian way of thinking about family. And so listen to what Noelle Mering says to Lila Rose in this podcast. It is fascinating to understand the root causes of why this trend is erupting with Gen Z. So take a listen to this.
Is that your sense of it, that this idea of the youth being the wiser ones, the youth rejecting the older ones, the old ones throwing them away, that's a very modern thing? Like, you don't really see much of that throughout human history.
Yeah, I love the way you described it. I mean, it's very ideological and very modern, right? So I think that that's exactly right. I mean, it's re-engineering society takes kind of a culture of forgetting. That you want to interrupt and then you want to forget. You don't want a unity with what's come before you. In the path of history, you want to be on the next thing, right? If you want to be at the right side of history, you want to be at the very end, the first to revolutionize the most. It creates this sort of hastening of the future, and a hastening to transgress. I mean, a big part of this is, a inversion of the fourth commandment: you honor thy father and thy mother, which is the only commandment that has a promise, so that you can live long and flourish in the land our Lord has given you. So I think, in other words, that there's some civic kind of implication to disregarding that commandment. And the interesting thing is that not only are we disregarding it, it really is an inversion. So there's a lot of common scripts amongst the no contact community. And one of the things that they will say is that, you chose to have me. I did not choose to be born. And so you owe me everything. I don't owe you anything. And, you hear in this language, they'll say, I didn't consent to my life. I didn't consent to being born. And one therapist I heard actually said this phrase, which totally jolted me, but he said, it's true. If you inflict life on unsuspecting flesh, you owe it a lot. And I was like, gosh, that sounds like sexual assault. Doesn't it? Imagine like the gift of life. You're giving somebody their life, and I'm not going to be grateful for it. I'm going to see that as a burden, right? It's not a blessing. It's a burden. And you did this to me. You inflicted life on unsuspecting flesh. And so, it's a recasting of what the role of the parent is.
And the point of life.
And the point of life.
Life is inherently, it's nihilistic. It's nihilism.
That's right. That's
life
right.
Life is inherently not good.
That's right. And one of the consequences is that those young adults then who bought into this philosophy, that's language of consent, which is basically meaning, consent there's a lot to that. It's a reflection of an autonomous understanding of the human person that has no moral language for any action except for, is it consent? Did I consent to it? Anything goes if I consented. Which actually prohibits any ability to contextualize when we've made bad choices and we suffer from them. If I consented and then I'm suffering from it, I consented, so it must have been fine. So who is to blame here? And it makes you look outside again. But anyway, my point was going to be the young adults who have adopted this language, I did not choose to be born, they are not moving into parenthood. And it makes perfect sense, because if parenthood, by their own definition and framework, is something that's not honorable, it's not noble, it's just a lot of work, and you might end up isolated and rejected at the end of it by your adult children. And you look back in your own childhood and you're like, look at all the mistakes they made anyways. Yeah. Why would you want to move into that category? And so I think it really explains a lot about why these young adults are not moving into the category of parenthood. I just listened to this interview of this beautiful Israeli director. She's a documentarian. And she was talking about why she's not had children to an older woman who's was her friend's mom. And the woman said, when you have children, it makes you less spontaneous. You have to look at someone else's priorities and put them above your own. And she was saying these things that are about generosity. And the woman kind of laughed, and the young woman laughed, and she said, you're making the case for why I don't want to be a mom. And then the older woman said, don't you think that's there's a tish of selfishness to that? And she immediately went on to kind of like almost like a sanctimonious moment. Like she said, we think that it's actually selfish to have children because this world is really horrible and there's a lot of suffering. And, I tell my parents all the time, I did not ask to come into this world. So, so you can see how not only does it make parenthood unappealing, it also gives a moral cover for it, for rejecting it altogether.
So dark.
It really is. It really is.
In a culture that valorizes victimization, it's always going to be incredibly popular to cut off your parents and really believe that they are responsible for inflicting a kind of trauma on you. This is the kind of victimization that everyone has access to because our parents have screwed us up, no matter who you are. That's true. And we live in the first generation in history where most of us have taken psychology classes, either in high school or in college. And so we see the impact that our parents have on us. The Bible knew that as well, but how the Bible talks about this is the complete opposite of the way that the culture talks about this. The culture talks about our parents as people who owe us an endless debt. They could never pay down the debt that was created by their decision to bring us into this world, and therefore they're personally responsible for every bad thing we experience, all the trauma, all the pain. It ultimately comes back to the decision that our parents made to have us. That is the opposite of the way the Bible talks about this. In 1 Timothy 5, Paul says that every person who has, for example, a widow in their family, he says must repay her. And their first responsibility is to take care of that member of the family. Why does it use that word? Why does it say repay? Because the Bible sees that the debt is actually on the child, not on the parents. This is why in the Ten Commandments, it says that we are to honor our father and mother and get this blessing of life, of an abundant life. Why is that? Because it's our responsibility. It's really a matter of justice and righteousness that we care for our parents because they did so much for us. So the Bible starts from the premise that life is a good thing, that it's an incredible gift to be given life. It's an incredible gift to be raised by parents. And for every sacrifice that they made that went without us noticing, those are things that constantly we're accumulating a debt, not a debt of that we have to pay them back a dollar for dollar, but it's really a debt of honor. And that's why it says in the fourth commandment that we must honor our father and mother. Now, our culture believes that the only grounding for morality is not the Torah, not the Ten Commandments, not what Scripture says, but is this area of consent, right? And so this is why in what you're seeing happen in a lot of universities where there are so many rules around consent, all the steps of consent in any kind of relationship. And this really gets back to what G.K. Chesterton said. He said that if you don't believe in the 10 commandments, then you're going to have to come up with the 10,000 commandments. And so we're in the process right now of coming up with those 10,000 commandments. But did you know that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible where we see the law contained, and this is just kind of the grounding of our understanding of justice and righteousness, that there are more commands in the Torah given to us about how to honor and care for our parents than how to care for our children. So we live in a culture that oftentimes can be obsessed with safetyism around children, but completely neglects our responsibility towards our parents. Now, the problem, you guys, is that this creates a certain kind of culture in which no one wants to be parents. This creates a culture of death instead of life. This creates a culture of plummeting fertility. We have to lift up and honor our parents, and this will cause our children and grandchildren to live in a world where they are also going to be honored and that they're looking forward to, as they get older, having this position of honor in the family. This creates a beautiful culture, a culture of life instead of death. But our culture doesn't understand that. Our culture desperately wants to make it all about us. And so we're creating these terminal generations constantly just by the kinds of values that we're promoting. So I love this conversation. You guys can check out that conversation if you want to hear more about what Lila Rose and Noelle were describing there. But also check out this video where my daughter and I go through something that Dave Ramsey said that kind of shocked us, which articulates perfectly a secular ideology. And I know Dave Ramsey is a believer. So this really surprised us that he has the same kind of ideas about whether or not a child owes their parents anything or not, or does the parents owe the child. So take a listen to the way that Dave Ramsey describes this in this video and how we kind of unpack this belief and look at it through a biblical lens.